Third person advice is almost always difficult to put into practice. Today, I kind of want to talk about a scenario and a phenomenon that I think a lot of people struggle with, especially when it comes to giving advice to others, and is the difficulty when you choose to give advice to other people, but when you try and apply that own advice for yourself, it doesn't seem to go as well. Now, you've definitely or most likely already heard the term practice what you preach, and it's pretty much simple at what it means. It's just whatever you believe in, actually do it, like actually apply it to your own situations. And I'm sure that when it comes to these third person situations where you feel like you're giving advice to other people, when you actually want to translate it to your own situations, it's definitely something where you're trying to practice what you preach and do what you're actually intending, especially when you tell other people. Because it's funny, in your own head, you'll think, oh, I know everything, the ins and outs of this situation, so why shouldn't I be able to apply the same logic to the own problems that are happening in my life? Why shouldn't I be able to successfully do the same? But today, I kind of want to get rid of that stigma of thinking that it's so easy or that you might be wrong in what you're thinking, and kind of help change your way of thinking as far as what it comes to practicing what you preach. So the first thing I want to talk about is, as far as the advice side, when you're giving advice to another person, you have to realize that you're not actually in the heat of the situation. I want you to kind of imagine it as if you're kind of sitting off to the side in like a lazy river in a tubing thing, and this guy is like, this guy or girl, whoever you're giving advice to, is on the wave machine. So you're still giving them advice, you're still helping them, but you're not actually having to deal with the stress and the heat of the actual situation, because you're instead giving advice and telling this person what they should do. And it's also easier more often than not for other people to give advice to someone in a situation, because more often than not, that heat that they're in, it causes them to be narrow-minded, and it can sometimes be difficult for them to think of the solutions that you might give them because they're so stressed with like a matter of time or who they're talking to. It's just a lot of things that factor into making us very narrow-minded, and it's almost always difficult for us to come up with solutions on our own, which is why we usually seek the advice and counsel of other people. And on account of that, in most scenarios, it's almost always good to have an outside perspective, because that person is not only nuanced in the fact that they can try to understand both sides of whatever's happening, but also, like I said, they're not having to deal with the heat of the situation. And so they're not having to deal with the same stresses that you are, so they're able to better, more calm and calculatedly, figure out a solution to your problem. But on that same token, when it comes to you yourself, the way you go about practicing what you preach is a little bit different from how you give advice to other people. So, like I said, with the person that you're giving advice to, they're on the wave machine. They're having to struggle with the waves, the surfboard, and stay afloat. And when you end up in that same situation, you yourself are now on the wave machine. You are struggling to stay afloat, and you have to make sure that you don't say anything that you don't intend to. And the reason why I think it's difficult for people to separate the fact that we give advice to other people and it's difficult to apply that same advice to ourselves is that more often than not, when you're giving advice to someone, not only is it a plan, but it is also something that you might have to wait on response for. You have like time to think through what you're going to say. And I've talked about this several times, and I'll talk about it so many times more. But conversation is obviously just something that we can't plot from step A, step B, step C, step D. It's really just a matter of following the flow. But when you give advice to someone, you're not really following the flow, because again, you're not in the heat of the situation, but also it might take some time for your advice to stick, because you give the advice to that person, they themselves have to actually use that advice and put it into practice, and then they'll probably have to get back to you and tell you what is happening. And it's basically a back and forth of that. So it's more often than not a very slow and methodical system of helping someone figure out their problems. But again, back to you, you're on the wave machine. More often than not, you might have that time to wait on other people to give you advice, but you're still kind of in the hot seat. So you're not necessarily as able to think through everything as smoothly and calculated, because you're in the hot seat and it's putting pressure on you. And it's very difficult for you to make calculated decisions when you're feeling pressured. Henceforth, why there's obviously this chain of we always go to other people for advice. But my advice to you, especially if you're struggling with figuring out things for yourself and always having to rely on other people for answers, is to again realize that same conclusion that I mentioned, where conversation is more of a flow. With advice from other people, you can tell them what to do step by step, and basically walk them through how to do what they want. But when it comes to you, instead of trying to follow that same step-by-step system, you should honestly just create a broader message for yourself that you'll follow no matter what. Because if your broader message doesn't actually specify anything that you have to do, it'll help you fit the standards of having to follow the flow of conversation. Because if conversation is like a natural flow and your broader message is simply just a statement, it doesn't really encompass like anything specific. And so it's easy for you to just kind of conform as long as it falls under the standard of what you're actually trying to do. So I'll basically just give you an example. Let's say that you get into an argument with your significant other and you're struggling to figure out what you should do exactly to mend the situation. Instead of trying to plot step A, step B, step C, what you should do in terms of figuring out how you should patch the issue up, you should instead think on broader terms and say, no matter what happens, I'm going to fix our relationship. I'm going to fix the problem. And I am by like no means saying that you shouldn't just like mindlessly go into a situation and not think about like what you're saying or what you're doing. But basically what it should be is that every single action you take, instead of thinking about it like a lot and overthinking it, it should follow this check where you do an action and you say, does this fall under the broader statement of wanting to repair the relationship? And if it does, you do it. And then you continue. And you check that for every single thing that you do. Because as long as it falls under that broader goal that you have, in most cases, you'll find yourself in a better situation versus you trying to figure out every single thing you should do in that situation. Because even if you don't necessarily achieve your goal, what it does is, again, it allows for you to follow that flow of conversation, because it's not really something that gives you time to like process every single thing that happens. It's, like I said, a smooth path of like talking to other people, so you don't always have the time to deduce every single thing that is said. But as long as you keep that broader message, it'll help you get through it. And by the end of it, if you achieve your goal or if you don't, you can still look back on it and say everything that I did followed my broader message. I didn't do anything that deviated from that idea. So that's my advice to anyone who's struggling and feels like they have difficulty practicing what they preach, especially when they give advice to other people. You don't have to be as methodical as you are when you're helping other people. Just try and give yourself a broader message. Think about what you're doing, but at the same time, don't think about every single step and every single thing you do, because it falls under the category of just human conversation and human connection. It's not something that makes a lot of time for overthinking about every single thing that you do. So again, keep that broader message. Try to reach that end goal by keeping that broader message in your head and do everything that aligns with that. Thank you very much.